This session today is a very popular, very critically important session, and we are excited on behalf of our agency to deliver it to our partners and our constituents in the Commonwealth of Virginia. The session is entitled Suicide Prevention for People with IDD. Our Alumni Development Program training alumni are graduates of one of our two flagship training programs. Either they graduated from the Youth Leadership Forum, formerly known as the Youth Leadership Forum, now known as the Youth Leadership Academy, and or they graduated from our Partners in Policymaking training program. So the graduates of those two training programs make up our training alumni, and they are committed to a mission of providing advocacy trainings and continuing education workshops focused on the broader disability community throughout the Commonwealth of Virginia. In order for us to provide these sessions, it takes a village. And so we take time to acknowledge, of course, the leadership of our Executive Director, Ms. Terry Morgan, from our administration team member, Tara Bethea, from our communications team, our communications and information manager, Ms. Anita Ayers, and providing closed captioning today from Virginia Relay is Ms. Joy or Joe Gale. Representing our partner from Boyknot Visual Communications, I call him our technology guru, Mr. Eli Red. We work very closely with DARS, and they handle all of our procurement. And so we acknowledge the team from DARS as well. Providing captioning for us today, representing Mosaic interpreting team is Ms. Bernice Venuto and Mr. Tristan Brown. We are very delighted to have them join us today. It's been a while since we've seen them, and they have been with us since the beginning of these sessions that started in 2020. We also acknowledge the teamwork that is offered to us from our Director of Planning, Research, and Evaluation, Ms. Nia Harrison. And of course, it is our unit that I'm privileged to serve as the Director, Training and Alumni Development Programs Unit, Ms. Christine Jeremiah, Coordinator, and Ms. Kelly Vanella. The three of us work very hard to make sure that we represent our agency very well. And so we welcome you again. We want you to know that this session is being live streamed on our agency's Facebook page and will be uploaded to our YouTube channel as well. All of you should have seen when you entered into the classroom today that there was already a poll up. There are two polls that we offer. The first that you are taking now is our About You poll, and it is simply an opportunity for us to know who is here in the classroom and who's attending the training. At the end of the session, and we hope that you will stay with us because your session feedback is extremely important to us. There will be a poll at the end of the session when the final presenter has presented their work. We are then going to put that poll up so that we can get as many of you to give us feedback today as possible. If you have a request for an alternative format, please let us know and we can drop it in the chat box, or you may email our Director of Planning, Evaluations, and Research, Nia Harrison, at vbpd.virginia.gov. We are going to move very swiftly because we want to give our presenters as much time as possible. And so it is my honor to present our two presenters to you. The first that will present is Ms. Marquita Madden. She serves as the Executive Director of the Virginia chapter of the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention. And following Ms. Madden, we will have Dr. Alexander, affectionately called Dr. Alex M. Fields, who serves as an associate professor in the Department of Counselor Education at Florida Atlantic University. Both of these presenters are dynamic in their own right. I'm sure that you will learn more about them as they make their presentation. but it is my honor now to present Ms. Marquita Madden, Executive Director for Virginia Chapter of the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention, as the first presenter.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Dr. Penny, for the introduction and for the invite to be here. I am going to move very swiftly today because I'm excited to hear from Dr. Alex myself. And so I feel like I'm just going to be kind of laying the groundwork for some of what he's going to share with us today. As Dr. Penny said, I'm with the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention, the Virginia chapter. I currently serve as the executive director, but I will share as I get started that, can you all see my presentation? I'm sorry.
Yes.
Okay. That I came to the work as a volunteer because I am a suicide loss survivor, and about 4 years ago now, when an opportunity came up to come to work for the organization, I was, quickly raised my hand and got in line to come to work for them. So our mission is very simple. It is to save lives and bring hope to those who have been impacted by suicide. And this is what I would call it's definitely our introduction to suicide prevention, but it's the presentation that I wish everybody in our general population could be exposed to. I'm going to, again, move through it very, very quickly today, but I think we'll have time at the end, or we're hoping to have some time at the end for questions. Our disclaimer that this is not a replacement for professional or medical advice. This is, again, for informational purposes only. If you feel you need additional help or support after we share today, please seek that support for yourself or your loved ones. I've already said this, but I'll recap it. Our mission is to save lives and bring hope to those affected by suicide. We work basically, there's 5 core strategies listed here. I'm going to highlight 4. I think 2 of them kind of go together. We started as a research organization seeking to answer the question, why are people dying by suicide? So research is still a key part of the work that we do. Advocacy, we were in Richmond just a couple of weeks ago advocating for mental health and suicide prevention legislation, and education, like what we're doing here today, and then outreach and support and public awareness, support particularly for people who have been impacted, whether they have lost someone to suicide, whether they struggle themselves, or whether they've made an attempt in the past. Mental health matters. It's just like physical health. We really want people to begin to frame their mental health just like they do their physical health, in part because we know that 90% of people who die by suicide had a mental health condition at the time of their death. Most people with these mental health conditions, I have to say, do not go on to die by suicide, but we do know that people who die by suicide do have a mental health condition at the time of their death. Sometimes it has not been diagnosed. Sometimes it has not been adequately diagnosed. Sometimes it's being treated. Sometimes it's not being treated, or it's not being treated properly. So what we're really striving to do is build a culture that addresses suicide prevention, and whatever avenues we can, we take a public health approach to bringing that message to our communities. What we want you to learn by the time I go through my portion of today's of the presentation today, we want you to be able to know a little bit about the impact of suicide, be able to identify some contributors to suicide and some protective factors as well, understand how it might impact certain communities differently, describe how to recognize suicide warning signs, provide examples of how to start a conversation about suicide with someone you're concerned about, and then to list ways to seek and offer support and crisis resources for yourself and for others. And I always like to say that because sometimes we listen to presentations and we hear them in third person. But certainly if you see yourself in anything that we talk about today, please don't be hesitant to seek the help that you need. Housekeeping things. What you will not hear me use the phrase committed suicide. You won't hear me use the phrases failed or successful attempt when it comes to someone's attempt to take their own life. The reason we don't is there's some judgment around that terminology. And we want to do all that we can to not perpetuate the stigma that surrounds the conversations about our mental health. as a loss survivor now, when I hear someone say committed, I can tell you on the inside of me, it's like somebody running fingernails down the chalkboard, in part because of some of the things that people have said to us since I've lost my loved ones. So instead, what you'll hear is hear me use the phrase died by suicide, ended their life, a suicide attempt, death by suicide, or you'll also hear the terms suicide loss survivor, survivor of suicide loss, suicide bereaved, bereaved by suicide. And then when we're talking about people who have struggled with suicidal thoughts or who have made attempts in the past, you'll hear me refer to them as people with lived experience or a suicide attempt survivor. Suicide is a leading cause of death in the US. We know that every year, nearly 50,000 people die by suicide. We know that there are well over 1 million each year who attempt suicide. And then we know that there are millions more who have thoughts of suicide. So the impact of suicide is far reaching. I always think of it as that domino effect. We hear 50,000 people die, but think about how many people that has touched. As someone who works in this arena, and we are primarily a volunteer-driven organization, when my volunteers are out in the public and they have something on that identifies them, not even just as working with AFSP, but as a mental health advocate in general, it is not uncommon to hear stories from them of people just approaching and sharing that how they've been impacted in some way by either their own mental health struggles or mental health struggles of someone close to them. So we know through research, but in my unofficial research, just by those stories that I hear, I can tell you that most adults in the US have in some way been touched by suicide. I'm going to go over this part kind of quickly, but what I really want people to take away from this next couple of slides is that while suicide affects different populations in different numbers and at different rates, nobody is really excluded from being at risk of suicide. We do know through research and through following trends that males have a greater rate of suicide. We know that older adults have greater rates of suicide. We know that veterans have higher rates of suicide, and that homes that have firearms also have higher rates of suicide. We know that the rate of suicide has been increasing among young people. We know that, but even though their rates are still relatively low, we know that rates are generally lower among people of color, but those rates are growing faster than other demographics. We know that rates among Black and AAPI youth have been also increasing, similar to other racial and ethnic groups of color. And then Indigenous youth and young adults die by suicide at higher rates than any other racial or ethnic group. Really quickly, some trends also that we follow and some focus that we currently have as an organization is on the construction industry. We know that that is a population that is disproportionately affected by suicide. So again, all coming back to some of the research that we do, some of the partnerships that we have, and some of the groups that approach us asking us to help educate those particular populations. So I'm really grateful to be in this setting today as well. When somebody dies by suicide, we often see a particular life event. Maybe we see they went through a breakup or they lost a job, and we think that was the reason that they died by suicide. There's never one single cause of suicide. Generally, what we see there is just one of the factors that's at play. Behind the scenes, there might be some biological factors at play, some psychological factors at play, and then those social and environmental factors that combine with those events. And then you add a situation where someone has access to lethal means, and now you've got someone who's at risk of dying by suicide. So we can see on this slide examples of a lot of underlying biological, psychological, social, and environmental factors, things like substance use, trauma, and chronic health conditions. But a crisis can occur if a person has several contributors to underlying risk, and then they experience one or more stressors, or perceived stressors even in the moment that feel really unsolvable to them. Research shows us that there are cognitive changes that occur during that crisis. They get like this really intense tunnel vision where they don't really see that hopelessness that they're feeling in that moment ending. All they can imagine, or the only thing they see as a solution, is finding a way to end the pain that they're experiencing in that moment. And sometimes the solution to what they're experiencing is suicide. So, some of the potential contributors to suicide risk and behavior, these would be those biological, psychological, social, environmental factors that we saw on the other side that converge to contribute to suicide risk. Most people who die by suicide have at least one mental health condition at the time of their death. So depression, bipolar disorder, substance use, other health conditions, these can be strongly linked to suicidal thinking and behavior. Past suicide attempts can also indicate risk for future suicidal behavior. I do want to note that most people who make an attempt who've made an attempt in the past do not, in fact, go on to die by suicide. But when we consider all other factors, that is something that factors into the risk as well. A family history of suicide or mental health conditions, as well as exposure to suicide, can contribute to risk. Physical health conditions, chronic pain, these things can also increase risk, particularly following the diagnosis or the disclosure of a diagnosis. We hear a lot about traumatic brain injury that can lead to depression, difficulty with problem solving, and cause impulsivity, aggression, disability. All of these things can increase a person's risk. And then adverse childhood experiences, including growing up, witnessing or experiencing violence, abuse, or neglect, loss of a family member through divorce, death, or prison. These are also risk factors. And lastly, social factors that contribute to suicide risk would include the presence of severe ongoing interpersonal conflict, rejection by one's family, feeling victimized, race or gender related discrimination, historical trauma. These can all increase someone's susceptibility to suicide. The hopeful news is, we have those risk factors at play, but we also have protective factors that can reduce a person's risk of suicide. And that they include things like coping skills, sources of strength and resilience. A person's resilience would be, their ability to overcome difficult and challenging barriers in their life, their ability to connect with other people who can provide emotional support and ground them in a sense of connection, and support from people who love them. These can all mitigate the risk of dying by suicide. A person's willingness also to participate in mental health care, as well as having that care available and accessible, is also a very important role and can be life-saving. If anybody can experience suicide risk, then why do certain groups and populations have higher suicide rates? I'm going to go very quickly over these next couple of slides because they don't speak specifically to the population that we're talking about today. And I think Dr. Alex is going to touch on that a little bit more. But again, I'm going to go quickly. Suicide in older adults. This is a population that is, one of the greatest impacted, but it's often because depression can be unidentified or untreated. Depression is not a natural part of getting older. Just because we're getting older doesn't mean we should be depressed. We should still be able to enjoy life. Chronic illness and pain. And then also because when an older adult attempts to end their life, those attempts more often result in death. And they're more likely to experience loss compared to other groups. So losing their peer group, losing their spouse, sometimes even losing a pet, all of these things factor into the risk that cause that number, that population to be at sometimes greater risk. LGBTQ individuals, we hear about this population a lot. I will say very quickly that it's kind of the social stigma, the discrimination, the feeling of disconnect, often from areas where they feel they should be receiving support, like that family support, if the family has rejected someone in this population. These things all factor into those risks. Veterans, this is a population that we hear a lot about. Number one thing that I'll say, just to recap very quickly here, veterans still deal with a lot of stigma because they are our community heroes, right? And so for them to say that they're struggling in some way can be difficult. Another thing that also kind of increases their risk is more veteran households have firearms than non-veteran households. And then having that accessibility back and to lethal means that can factor in. So that just gives you a sense of some of the things that can vary from population to population. We could go into a lot more depth and talk about other populations. There are a lot of intersectionalities often, but what is common for everyone and what we do know for everyone is that thoughts of suicide are complex. Everybody's journey is different and very unique, but what we have learned is that most people who experience thoughts of suicide really are ambivalent about life. They have part of them that wants to live, part of them not so much wants to die, but they want their pain to end. So they think if they weren't around, it might be better for everyone else. They feel like a burden. They feel overwhelmed and helpless. And again, they're experiencing this very intense tunnel vision. And so their problem solving goes to ending the pain. So their perspective is they're in this crisis point. They're having this unbearable physical or emotional pain, sometimes both. That feels very unescapable. And then the brain is operating differently in this moment. They just can't, again, those problem-solving skills are not working. They can't access their usual coping skills. And it's not a choice. It is not a choice for them to when they reach this point to feel the way that they do. But they just kind of become hyper-focused on ending the pain. And again, the only solution they may see is to end their life. So we also know that thoughts of suicide are often temporary. Keeping people safe and helping them feel supported can get them through those critical moments. Time and distance are life-saving. It gives, again, the intensity of that moment to pass, time for somebody to step in and say, here's some mental health support and resources, and to put some distance between that painful experience that they're having. The good news also is that there's some things we can all do to help save lives and prevent suicide. So some steps we can take. We can watch for warning signs. We've talked about risk factors. We're going to talk quickly about warning signs. You can reach out and have a conversation. You can keep the environment safe, and you can connect them to help and resources. Warning signs are different from risk factors because risk factors would be those things that kind of endure over time. Warning signs, I like to say, are those things that make our spidey senses go off and make us feel that something is, or the danger is more imminent. And warning signs usually show up in one of three ways. They can show up in talk, the way that a person is talking about their life. They might express that they are feeling hopeless. They might express a desire to end their life. They might say it in a joking manner. I implore you, take it seriously. Even if they laugh it off later, take it seriously. Take a pause, think about approaching the conversation. They might talk about, this unbearable pain that they're experiencing. So we'll hear things in the way that they talk. Their behavior, we might see an increased use of alcohol or drugs. We might see issues with sleep. They might begin to act very recklessly, take risks they wouldn't normally take. Withdraw from activities that they normally enjoy, isolate from family and friends. They might look for a way to kill themselves. Are they trying to buy a firearm? Are they looking up things online to explore methods? Are they giving away possessions? I always kind of chuckle on the inside when I get there, because get to this one, because I think back to being younger and on sitcoms, that would always be a thing if someone was thinking about this. And I always thought it was, I guess I kind of thought it was silly, but it's true. But going hand in hand with giving away possessions also can be spending money very recklessly. They might miss work, or they might have declining work or school performance. Their mood. Depression is the one we think of. We know, right? If somebody's depressed, we'll think about, are they having these thoughts? But they might also be very apathetic. They just don't care about anything right now. Rage. They might be angry all the time. I always think we want to put distance between ourselves and angry people. Who wants to be around angry people? We don't think at the heart of it, they might actually be very sad. And then irritability, are you on eggshells around them because you feel like the least little thing is going to trigger them? Impulsivity, being very impulsive, expressing a feeling of humiliation, and noticeably anxious. One that we might overlook is sudden unexplained happiness. Because often when someone's been displaying these other signs and have these risk factors at play, and they've settled on a decision, now they're relieved and they're suddenly very happy. That can be a tough one, because I think if we care about someone and they've been really sad for a while, or even angry, and now they're happy, we want to be relieved. But again, all things considered, that might be a sign to have a conversation. So that takes us right to step 2. You can have a conversation. Trust your instinct. If you feel like there's something going on with the person you care about, have that conversation. Assume you're the only one who's going to reach out. Don't assume that somebody else is going to do it, and be okay with the awkwardness. I was giving a presentation to a group of teachers last night, and we stopped and talked a little bit about getting past that awkwardness. It's not an easy conversation to have. We put the slide up here. I can go over it really quickly in the presentation and say, have a conversation. But when you're having a conversation about something that is so heavy, it can be very awkward, and it can be very difficult to even approach the subject. I live by a motto that says, be bold. When you look back on life, you'll regret the things you didn't do more than the things you did. And that's the way that I frame it. If I've ever had to have a conversation with somebody about this, something like this, then I always think, how are you going to feel if you don't? So be comfortable with the awkwardness. Some reminders before you reach out: avoid minimizing their feelings. I think we often do this too with young people, because as adults, we look back on some of their experiences. We know we know it's like, we lived through it, you'll get through it. But in that moment, it's a big deal to them. And we all go through it with different experiences. As an adult, if I'm going through a new experience that's challenging, it can be big to me. Somebody else who's been through it before might look back and minimize it with me as well. But that's the best example I can think of. Allow that person to have their feelings. Avoid debating them that life is worth living. Remember, they're experiencing this very constricted tunnel vision right now. So they cannot have an argument with you or a big philosophical debate about the merits of life. You want to avoid offering advice on how to fix it. We always say, if somebody is having a heart attack, we don't tell them in that moment to start exercising and eating right. And then remember that your role is to listen and help them connect to resources. So you don't have to fix it. You just have to get them to those resources. And on the screen are some examples of how you might start that conversation. For example, you might say, I've missed seeing you at the gym lately. With everything that's going on with your family, I wonder if you're feeling overwhelmed. The next step is you're going to want to listen with empathy. Ask open-ended questions and listen to their response. Show empathy and support with your words and your body language, and listen for warning signs. And the number one thing
Marquita, Miss Madden, you went on mute for some reason. Can you hear me? We cannot hear you any longer.
Go from here when this conversation is over. I'm getting a message that my internet is unstable. I hope that I
Yeah,
haven't
you went
frozen.
out, you went out for just a few minutes, for
Okay.
just a few seconds, actually.
Okay.
You're
Good.
back.
Okay. Great. But you want to stay calm and you, again, listen. Um, Ask directly about suicide. Research shows us that asking about suicide is not going to put the thought in someone's head. It can bring relief and can be very life-saving. I um I think of it, when I hear that comment, I think of someone just kind of letting their guard down when you ask the question, because I would imagine if you're having these thoughts, trying to get those words out and tell someone exactly what you need can be like climbing a mountain. So if someone else comes to you and poses the question and begins to guide the conversation, uh, how much relief that would offer to someone. You don't want to say something like, "Are you thinking of doing something silly?" Because again, this isn't a solution to a problem for them, so it's not silly. And you don't want to say, "Are you thinking of hurting yourself?" Because they're already hurting. And to them, again, this is a way to end the pain. So you want to be very direct with the question. If they're not thinking about suicide, then you just want to continue to listen and provide support. Um, they might just be struggling, going through a hard time, and you can offer them some encouragement still. You can say to them, "I'm sorry you're hurting so much." Um, at the very least, it's going to make a difference that somebody noticed they were having a tough time and offered to listen. If they're thinking about suicide, then you want to find out more, because just because someone is having the thought doesn't mean that they're in immediate danger. So you want to ask a few more questions. Do they have a method in mind? What can we do to help keep them safe in that moment? And how can we offer them some help? So take the time to calmly listen and then ask those follow-up questions to get the information we need to go from there. Thank them for sharing with you after that. Remind them you're there for them. Connect them with resources and stay in touch. Sometimes we hear from loved ones things like this, and then the awkwardness really kicks in. But after they've shared this with you and after they've been connected to resources, they still need that relationship and that support and that connection with you. So don't be afraid to circle back around and let them know you're still thinking.
Your internet went out again. We can't hear you, Miss Madden. We can't hear you.
Oh,
Let's see if you're back.
am I back?
Yes.
Okay, I'll try to go quickly. I'm sorry. I don't know what's going on. But again, thank them for sharing with you, and don't be afraid to stay in touch and continue to support them after you've connected them to resources. I'm gonna skip the video here just for the interest of time. You are welcome to look online at our Talk Away the Dark campaign, and you can see the video clip. It just shows you how to have that conversation that we just talked about. The most important thing you can put between a person thinking about suicide and their way of ending their life is time. You just want to help them, and we're going to talk about this really quickly in the next couple of slides, but keeping their environment safe is one way that you can make sure to provide them with time for that crisis to de-escalate. You
We
can
have
help them.
about 5 more minutes, Miss Madden.
Okay.
So
Help them limit access to lethal means, remove firearms to store ammunition, secure medication and toxic substances, and then ask them what they need to feel safer and encourage them to refrain from any type of substance use because that can affect their decision making, obviously, and encourage them to discuss keeping the environment safe with a mental health professional. Firearms are used in nearly half of all U.S. firearms are in nearly half of all U.S. households, and they're used in about half of the suicides in the country. In parts of Virginia and different counties, that number runs higher to about 90%. 90% of firearm deaths are suicides. So firearm safety is a priority, making sure, again, because it can be one of the most fatal methods used, that is a step that's taken to keep people safe. Really quickly here, just want to make sure that you all know your resources before you need them. What I want to highlight here, if you all, I'm assuming you all know it, but 988, if you cannot remember anything else, call 988. If you're supporting someone and you just need help finding resources, you can call 988. You can text 988 and you can ask for those resources. You don't have to be in a crisis in that moment to use that as a resource. But if all else fails and you find yourself in a crisis situation, call 988. For medical emergencies like an attempt in progress, call 911. Connect to professional care. There are some sites listed here where you can find the mental health care that you maybe need help seeking. Prevention is postvention is prevention. So for those who have had loss to suicide, take advantage of those services available to help you heal as well. There are some resources listed here on the screen, but you can find them all at afsp.org as well. And then really the last thing, there are a couple of slides after this I'll go through quickly, but prioritize self-care. We can do all of these other things, but the one thing that we can also be very proactive about is taking care of ourselves through our mind, body, soul, and surroundings. And I'm going to skip this other video as well, because together we can create a culture that prioritizes mental health and suicide prevention. It's a simple concept for us, but talking really does save lives. So I thank you all.
Thank you so much, Ms. Madden. I know that there are a few questions that came up in the chat. And look at all the applause and the claps and the hands. Thank you so very much for your presentation. And it was truly an introduction. You've helped us tremendously. If you don't mind, I'd like to just pause the questions and then introduce Dr. Alexander Alex Fields, who will now make his presentation. And then at the end, if there are questions, we will try to manage them then. Otherwise, we will give you access to their contact information, but I'm sure that as you've already seen, she's providing some resources as well for you. There are questions coming in the chat. We will provide the recording to all attendees. Dr. Alex Fields' presentation can be shared with all of the attendees. We will not be sharing the PowerPoint from Ms. Madden, but you will have access to the recording, and you can always go to Virginia Board for People with Disabilities Facebook page and our YouTube page to also see the presentation and recording. Dr. Alex, you're on.
All right, can you all hear me?
Yes, sir.
Can you see the presentation and everything?
Yes.
Wonderful. All right, well, I could not, first off, thank you, Ms. Madden, for that wonderful presentation. That was truly a great introduction to what I will be talking about today. It's truly an honor to be here, and I'm very excited to talk to you all today. I know it's weird to hear the word excited when we're talking about suicide prevention and intervention, but truly, as we've been talking about so far, this is such a meaningful conversation and one that I hope that we can continue beyond the presentation today. So for a quick little overview of myself, and I've got an About Me slide after here that I'll quickly go through. So as Dr. Penny mentioned, I am an assistant professor at Florida Atlantic University, and I primarily work in our counselor education department, which is housed in our College of Education. And I work mostly with our students in the school counseling program. I also do work with our clinical mental health counseling students, our rehab counseling students, and I work a lot with our doctoral program, serving on dissertation committees and chairing dissertations and teaching in their courses. But in addition to my life in academia, I'm also a licensed mental health counselor in the state of Florida and Nebraska. I'm telling you this up front now because some of the things that I might talk about might get a little bit clinical, or you might see some clinical language in there. But I do hope that today I can kind of break that down a little bit more for you, because it's not just clinicians who've got a role in preventing suicide, it's everyone in the community. And I hope today that you can learn a little bit more about what your role looks like for individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities, or what I might refer to as IDD, throughout this. I also want to just give a little background on how my passion area grew in this and how I came to be kind of involved in the suicide prevention intervention space for young adults with IDD. So I can kind of go maybe on the next slide. I'll give the fun about me. So I was born and raised in Ohio, went to Ohio State for my undergrad in neuroscience. After being at Ohio State, I moved to Florida for a couple of years where I supervised a foster care facility where I was first introduced to individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities. I primarily worked with those from 0 to 16. And I did a lot of the individualized support. I do something else from Ohio too. It's part of my personality. And I did a lot of the individualized support for our children and adolescents that had IDD. And that kind of inspired me to go back to get my master's in both clinical mental health and marriage, couples, and family therapy. I practiced for a little bit of time in Florida, primarily working in the Orange County, which is an Orlando drug court program, where I did a lot of the substance abuse work. But my main population within the drug court program were those that had co-occurring mental health conditions or disabilities, where I continued working with individuals with intellectual disabilities. And then that springboarded me into the University of South Carolina, where I did my doctorate in counselor education. And during my time there, both at UCF and South Carolina, I worked for their inclusive post-secondary education programs, or IPSE programs, which you might hear me refer to. And these are programs specifically designed for individuals with intellectual disabilities and helping provide the accommodations and support to be able to receive their post-secondary education. And when I was there, the director ended up going to the Institute for Community Inclusion, which is at University of Massachusetts at Boston. And during our time together working at both UCF and South Carolina, when she went to more the national level, we just noticed a big uptake of individuals that were starting to express either suicidal thoughts or behaviors, just suicide ideation in general. And there were limited to no resources available specifically for this population. And she kind of asked if I'd be willing to help springboard some initiatives for IPSE programs. And that has kind of led to this research endeavor and this clinical practice endeavor, looking at best strategies to promote suicide prevention intervention for those that have disabilities, specifically those with an IDD. And there's some fun pictures to get you through your day. All right. So for the agenda and what I'm going to be talking to you about for about the next hour, I'm trying to watch time as I do this. So first, similar to the last presentation, I'll go a little bit about some of the research and statistics behind it. I won't go into too much depth because we got a beautiful overview before this, but maybe I'll focus a little bit more on the disability portion of that. I had to see examples to kind of learn material. So I've incorporated a mock case study for us to go through today. And I'll talk a little bit more about that when we get to that section. Building off of what we talked about with the protective and risk factors, I can talk a little bit more about conceptualization of suicide and how to look for certain signs and symptoms specifically for individuals with an intellectual developmental disability. Then we'll go into some prevention efforts, talking about intervening as early as possible and how to make your community a little bit more safer for individuals having thoughts of suicide. Then we'll go briefly into safety planning considerations for intervention for individuals with suicidality and how to keep individuals safe for now. And then I have some brief resources that are available for you, and then just kind of summarize what we've talked about today. I do want to know that you will have access to this PowerPoint presentation. I provided everything for them to be able to give to you all. So please take this and use this. There's also references at the end too that I really, really encourage you to read. All right, and some learning objectives as well. My ultimate hope is that you take away at least one thing today whether it is deeper understanding about the public health crisis, maybe a new tool for your clinical toolbox, maybe it's a new strategy to help you relate to your friends or family, whatever it may be, just something that you can take into your community to make it a bit more safer in helping those individuals that are considering a death by suicide. All right, so let's talk about the research. So before we move into some of the tools and strategies, we really need to anchor ourselves into the conversation matters because suicide prevention with young adults with IDD is not hypothetical. It is not rare. It is not fringe. It is a public health necessity. I also want to start by acknowledging something that we've already talked about today, but just again, to normalize the emotional reactions that you might be having. Suicide is uncomfortable. It can be an awkward conversation to talk about. It can feel really heavy. It can feel really overwhelming, even frightening. But discomfort does not protect people. Preparedness does. So today is not about panic. Today is about preparation for you to be able to serve and be able to work with individuals in our community. All right. So looking at this slide, I've got a couple of different statistics on there for us to look at, specifically looking more at maybe the young adult population, because that's a lot of where my work really resides. But suicide ranks as the third leading cause of death among young adults in the United States. Just between 2000 and 2021, there was a 51% increase in suicide deaths among those aged 18 to 25. And then in 2022, 13.6% of young adults reported seriously considering suicide. I want that to sink in just one more time, that 13.6% of young adults in general reported seriously considering suicide. That's more than 1 in 10. So that's, let's say, for example, if you work in a facility, an agency, a school system, and you've got a program of individuals that have 20 young adults in there, statistically, at least 2 to 3 may be experiencing serious suicidal thoughts. And that's before we layer in disability-related factors. And I'm guessing with the crew that I've got today in our call, that we understand that having a disability, specifically an intellectual developmental disability, is going to elevate that risk that much more. So I want to slow down a little bit on this slide because this is where the urgency starts to become a little bit more clear. That young adults with IDD do face significantly higher rates of suicidal ideation and behavior compared to their non-disabled peers. And it's not a small increase, it is substantial. So let's walk through what that actually means. So I'll give your attention to each of the 3 alarming statistics on this slide. First, we see how there is a higher suicidal ideation rate. And I will explain suicidal ideation behaviors, thoughts on the continuum slide a little bit down the road. But it's 3 times higher an ideation rate for an individual with a disability. 3 times. That means when we work with disability services, we are not working in a protected population. We are working in a higher risk population. And if anything, systemic barriers may increase that vulnerability. In psychiatric samples, or when I say psychiatric samples, individuals diagnosed with a mental health disorder, usually coming from the DSM-5-TR or ICD-11, of youth with an intellectual developmental disability, up to 42% report suicidal thoughts, behaviors, or death by suicide. Marquita really emphasized this in her wonderful presentation, and it is important to note that individuals with disability are more likely to have co-occurring mental health conditions. So that's almost like a never-ending loop of this risk factor in here. And then on the right-hand side here, we can see that nearly 1 in 4 adolescents with autism report suicidal ideation compared to just 6.9% of their non-autistic peers. And those adolescents age in young adulthood, those vulnerabilities don't just disappear. We know with the transition from adolescence to adulthood comes with a lot of unique challenges and unique stressors, some of those risk factors that we talked about earlier. And then I'll talk about on the bottom there, youth with autism or intellectual disability present to emergency departments with suicidal ideation or intentional self-injury of rates of 5.1 to 6.6 compared to only 1.2% in the general population. So again, that's more than 4 times higher. And last but not least, when we see that to 60% or 30 to 64% of youth and young adults with IDD have co-occurring mental health diagnoses. That's 2.8 to 4.5 times higher than their same aged peers. So I'm hoping this is starting to paint the picture and the layered risk that is living with an intellectual and developmental disability. So now that we've established that there is an elevated risk, that risk alone does not explain outcomes, we also have to examine the historical and systemic barriers that have contributed to the under-recognition and the under-intervention, specifically with this population. One thing I do want to note on this slide, because I've done this before and I've gotten reactions, that this is not about blame. This is more about awareness. So if a lot of emotions are coming up for you and you're worried that maybe you could have been doing more in your previous practices or interactions, please let me be the first to say that do not blame yourself. This is an opportunity to learn and grow. And I'm hoping that, again, by having some conversations today, and I see that it takes a team effort, absolutely. And we're just adding more members of our team today through this workshop. So for many years, there has been an assumption, and sometimes explicit, sometimes subtle, that individuals with IDD lacked the cognitive capacity to experience suicidal ideations. And if you rolled your eyes, if you gave a confused face to this, you're not alone. I did that same exact thing when I heard the statistic for the first time, because this logic is very flawed. If someone has limitations in abstract reasoning, they may not fully grasp the concept of death is such a myth. But research has consistently demonstrated that individuals with intellectual disabilities do experience suicidal thoughts, and understanding suicide does not require philosophical reasoning. It requires experiencing psychological pain, kind of similar to what we talked about earlier. Also, there's diagnostic overshadowing, which is one of the most significant clinical risks in IDD populations just in general. And diagnostic overshadowing occurs when symptoms of mental health crisis are incorrectly attributed to the intellectual disability itself. So for example, withdrawal becomes, that's just typical autism, or irritability becomes, that's just one of their behaviors. Regression can be seen as non-compliance, or self-injury becomes baseline functioning. With that being said, instead of asking ourselves, like, what's wrong with this behavior, we need to reshape our minds in that thought process to what might this behavior be communicating? Which then leads into, after diagnostic overshadowing, this idea of under-identification. And this is where the research becomes particularly concerning, because 20% of youth with autism self-reported suicidal ideation that was not identified in a clinical interview. And 70% of adults with intellectual disabilities who had suicidal ideation were not recognized as such by their parents or their caregivers. So this can tell us maybe two things. Disclosure may not look typical for this population, and we may not always be interpreting their cues accurately or appropriately. We'll also hit on this in a little bit as well, that screening tools often include advanced reading levels, abstract hypothetical reasoning, complex rating scales, nuanced time references. And I'll be the first to say, like, one of my biggest research areas outside of folks with disabilities and chronic illness is scale development, instrument development, and validation. And I can tell you right now, one of the biggest challenges that when I try to help adapt a scale for individuals with an intellectual disability, sometimes I even get lost on what the construct is trying to say. And when we're making sure that we're having some of these really high risk assessments like a Columbia Suicide Severity Scale, we need to be able to adapt those to make sure that they're accurately reaching the population that we're trying to work with. And there's also communication differences. Emotional distress may manifest differently in individuals with intellectual disabilities. Some may laugh during moments of anxiety. Some may escalate behaviorally. Some may shut down. And some may become fatigued when you have a lengthy assessment. So one thing I will say, that best practice is to use direct, concrete language. Again, I'm really happy that we were able to have that presentation beforehand, because I think it provided a lot of good contextual information for us. So maybe instead of something like, have you experienced persistent existential despair, which is in an assessment that I have used before, have you thought about hurting yourself? Have you thought about dying by suicide? Those really direct and concrete ways of saying it need to be expressed when we're working with suicide. All right, next we're going to meet Darius, and I'm not sure about y'all, but I do need examples to make something make sense to me. So if you're in the same boat as me, I do have a treat for you. I'm going to introduce you to Darius. He is a fictional young adult with an intellectual and developmental disability who is experiencing thoughts of suicide. So for the remaining parts of today's workshop, when you hear this young gentleman's, or when you see this young gentleman's side profile, we will specifically be talking about Darius. But as we talk about conceptualizing suicide, as we talk about suicide prevention, as we talk about suicide intervention, you might want to continuously reflect on Darius's case and try to apply things about him. On the next slide, I am going to give a bigger overview of Darius and some things to consider about him, but you're going to see a QR code in the top right-hand corner. Again, if you're like myself and you need a consistent reminder, that QR code is going to give you exactly this slide, and you are able to have it pulled up throughout the rest of my talk today and be able to reflect upon it and use it accordingly. So let's talk about Darius. So meet Darius. Again, while he is fictional, he is definitely realistic. He represents the kind of young adults many of you may be working with every day. Some of you may have as a friend, and some of you may provide love and support to. And Darius is a 23-year-old adult. He is on the autism spectrum disorder spectrum and has moderate intellectual disability. He communicates in short phrases and gestures, and he uses a tablet-based communication app to express some of his more complex thoughts. Currently, he lives with his aunt, who identifies as his primary caregiver. He attends a day support program and works part-time through a supported employment with a job or vocational coach. So on the surface, this is a stable setup, has housing stability, family involvement, a structured day program, has employment support, has a job. And this is important because suicide risk does not occur and everyone's suicidality is not from what we'll call a quote, chaotic environment, but it can occur in your more unstructured and supportive environments too. So recent changes, so we'll talk about the last 4 to 6 weeks with this individual. There has been, over the last month, staff and his aunt have noticed several changes. They're reporting to that there's increased isolation, refusal of previously preferred activities. So for my clinical folks here, like think of anhedonia, things that you used to enjoy, no longer enjoying, sleeping more during the day, crying without clearly explaining why, lightheading during frustration, and repeated statements like bad brain and no job, no good. So each of these individually may not trigger an alarm, maybe attributing to something that happened during his morning or his day, but collectively, I'm hoping that you're starting to notice that they do form a pattern. So a quick sneak peek of what is to come. When working with individuals with IDD, pattern recognition is often more important than a single behavior. So I will say that once again, trying to pick up understanding that baseline, what you might describe as baseline or your general understanding of the individual. But once you start to notice some of these differences and picking up on those patterns, that can be critical in saving someone's life. So last week, staff discovered Darius hiding several of his prescribed anxiety pills in a sock drawer. The behavioral should start to signal us that he is starting to prepare. When asked directly, and I want you to notice the simplicity of this question, are you thinking about hurting yourself? He nodded and said, I'm going to take all the pills and go to sleep. This is not a vague report of sadness. That is an actionable risk. And some caregiver considerations and observations here as well. So his aunt reported additional concerning signs like him saying, my aunt's tired of me, increased agitation when discussing his work, and more difficulty using his communication device when he is having some emotional distress. So Some critical insight here is that we're starting to increase the likelihood of under recognition if we don't lean into some of these patterns that we're noticing. But again, we're going to use Darius throughout the rest of the workshop to explore how we conceptualized his risk, how we assess safely and accurately, and how we intervene effectively. All right. So now that we've got a brief background and we met Darius, let's talk about how we can conceptualize or make sense of the word suicide. What it means for someone to be suicidal. Some of this may be a refresher for someone, considering we just had a beautiful talk on this, or it could be a new insight into the experience of someone with suicidal ideation. Again, my hope is that these slides help us create a shared language to support those in our community. So right off the bat here, let's introduce a framework that helps us understand suicide risk in a structured way. So this is the suicide continuum. Suicide is not typically a single impulsive act that appears out of nowhere. It is often something that develops along a progression. So as we can see here on the left-hand side, we first have suicidal ideation. So suicidal ideation refers to thoughts about wanting to die. These thoughts can be passive, such as, I wish I hadn't woken up, or more active, I want to kill myself. Passive ideation does not necessarily mean low risk. It still very much reflects psychological pain. But on the other hand, ideation alone does not mean someone will attempt suicide. Because many individuals experience suicidal thoughts at some point and do not attempt. That distinction is extremely important. Next, the individual may move into a suicidal plan, and a suicidal plan involves thinking about how they would like to die. So this may include identifying a method, considering timing that may be more opportune for them, preparing materials, and rehearsing mentally how they would do it. And when someone moves from that vague distress or that ideation to a more specific plan, that shift increases our concern significantly. And then on the right-hand side here on step 3, or I shouldn't say step 3, on the third part of the continuum, suicidal attempt. And this stage involves engaging in behavior with the intent to end one's life. The intent is key here. Someone's behaviors may look like self-harm, but do not include intent to die. That distinction definitely requires a careful clinical assessment by a professional. So here's the clinical truth with the continuum, and I know I've already mentioned this when I talk about ideation, but individuals with suicidal ideation do not attempt suicide. However, a history of prior attempts is one of the strongest predictors of a future suicide. And movement along this continuum, especially from ideation to plan, increases that risk significantly. And again, I'll summarize Darius at the end of the continuum, or the conceptualization portion of this, and then the prevention, and then the intervention portions. But reflecting on some of the things that we talked about with Darius, maybe you have the slide pulled up. You can start to kind of make sense of how maybe he fits along the continuum. There's also 2 models of suicide risk that I want to introduce to you all. And again, these are just a shared language that clinicians may use, but I also want to make sure that everyone in the community is kind of aware of these as well, because it can make sense of maybe where someone is in their thought process. So the one key question I want to start off here is that both models are useful. Neither is perfect, and understanding both helps us to respond more accurately. And when we're thinking about these 2 models, we will compare 2 ideas. Is suicide a straight line, or it is a pressure gauge? So in other words, does it occur in a stepped process, or is it something that occurs after the pressure gauge has exploded? So we'll start off with that behavioral pathway model, that BPM on the left-hand side. And this model conceptualizes suicide as progressing in a predictable stepwise sequence, or the straight line from that question I just asked. The core assumption is that suicide moves forward in stages. So it goes from suicidal thoughts to a suicidal plan to the suicidal attempt. It's linear, it's structured, and it's clear. And that's its strengths, because it is an easier model to teach individuals. So I occasionally will teach the trauma and crisis courses in a counseling program, and I will have this as one of the options for students to use to conceptualize a client that they're working with or a hypothetical client that they're working with. Um, and I have found that that's usually the one that they can make the most sense of right off the bat. It also helps caregivers identify that escalation across the suicide continuum. It aligns pretty well with some of the screening tools that are common in clinical practice. And it also kind of clarifies when that urgency increases. So, for example, if someone says, I wish I didn't wake up, that's ideation. If they say, I'm going to take pills tonight, that's a plan. And we know that shift matters. But with every strength, there's also going to be a limitation of that, specifically the straight line process. So it does assume progression is predictable, and not everyone moves neatly from one step to the next. So you're not going to, like, in the perfect clinical model, we're not always going to see like step one become step two, become step three in a way that's easy to describe. Some escalate rapidly. Some fluctuate in where they are in that continuum. Some move backward with support. So again, that's just one way of looking at this. The next is that suicidal barometer model, that SBM that you see on your right-hand side. And this second model conceptualizes suicide risk as dynamic and fluctuating over time. So as opposed to that straight line, think of this as the pressure gauge, where when the pressure gauge gets too full, it might explode. So in this model, risk is influenced by biological vulnerability, neurodevelopmental conditions, co-occurring mental health disorders, which we learned about earlier in a slide as a higher risk for individuals with an intellectual or developmental disability, environmental stressors, and also situational changes. So in other words, this model acknowledges complexity. So some of the strengths of looking at suicide through this model is that it's particularly helpful when working with individuals with IDD because it accounts for the fluctuating emotional regulation range. It integrates neurodevelopmental differences, as you can see in that risk, that second bullet point there. It captures how stressors can be rapidly increase. And it might explain why someone might appear stable one day and then escalated the next. Some of the limitations that I think, again, I got analogies as well, is that it's less intuitive. So it does require ongoing assessment and ongoing support from a wide range of individuals. And it does demand a little bit of clinical nuance that you might have to understand some of these more protective and risk factors to be able to like accurately identify some of the things that go into there. At the end of the day, there is not a right or wrong way. However, a solid understanding of a model does help you make sense and helps you kind of conceptualize how you approach to prevention. And then last, but certainly not least, I want to talk to you a little bit more about the diathesis model, or the diathesis stress model, I should say. And for anyone in here who's got an interest in suicide, trauma, anything related to a crisis or a stressor, this is a really well-written and documented model to be able to kind of conceptualize that and make sense of it. But it also works really well with individuals that do have suicidal ideation. So in particular, this framework helps us understand suicide risk in a more nuanced way. This one answers the particular question, why do some individuals become vulnerable under stress, while others in similar circumstances do not? So in fact, this helps us add more language to some of the wonderful things that Marquita would mention earlier in her presentation. Consider these like the risk factors that contribute to someone considering a death by suicide. So the core idea is that suicidal behavior results from the interaction between predisposition, so that's also called diathesis, which usually that's going to be more of your clinical term, so I might stick with maybe more of that predisposition, and environmental stress. It is not one or the other, it is the interaction between them. So that diathesis or predisposition refers to underlying vulnerabilities. These can include some of the things that we talked about on the last slide, neurodevelopmental differences, emotional reactivity, cognitive processing challenges, social learning barriers, and a history of trauma. So adverse childhood experiences, early life stressors, ongoing traumatic events or stressors that are in the individual's life. But please note, because this is very important for diathesis, these are not character or personality flaws. They are vulnerability factors. So this does not mean IDD causes suicidality. It means certain cognitive and emotional differences may affect problem-solving flexibility, emotion regulation, perspective taking, coping strategy generation. So when we talk about stress, these differences matter. So now we move on to that bottom part there, that stress or the environmental triggers. So stress refers to life events or acute triggers. So for young adults with IDD, common stressors include job instability or relationship challenges, like you're having to learn how to make your own friends and figure out what kind of values and things that you want to see in your friends and people in your life. There is that loss of independence potentially. Or on the flip side of that, gaining an independence that you've never experienced in your life, and that the stress that comes with that. Social exclusion, we know, is popular with individuals with an intellectual developmental disability. And then once again, wanting to reemphasize the higher prevalence of co-occurring mental health symptoms or conditions. So young adulthood is already a high stress developmental period. So when someone also experiences having a disability, that stress load just increases. So a way of looking at this model. So that interaction is key because stress alone does not create suicidality. And on the flip side, predisposition alone does not create suicidality. But when stress exceeds coping capacity in someone with vulnerability, risk greatly increases. So let's go back to our new friend Darius here. I'm going to take a quick sip of water as you maybe reflect on some of the things that Darius talked about in his case presentation. So if we want to consider Darius's case here, let's first look at the suicide continuum. Darius was not just vaguely distressed. He had ideation. He mentioned bad brain, no good. He had a plan that he disclosed. Take all pills and go to sleep. Should give you a bit of an indicator there. And was demonstrating some preparatory behavior when he was hiding his medication from his support team. So that's not passive frustration. This is starting to escalate specifically. And he has not attempted, but movement along the continuum, once again, does increase risk. There's also the behavioral pathway model, or the BPM. From a behavioral pathway perspective, we do see clear progression. We did see thoughts going into a plan, then accessing the means that could potentially end his life. So the fact that he hit his medication indicates behavioral movement. That's no longer a hypothetical. That is, once again, preparatory behavior. On the third there that we see that suicidal barometer model, their SBM. So zooming out from maybe more of that linear approach, risk not just be considering a sequence. This more represents the fluctuation that might be in Darius's case. So looking out and again, considering that bigger picture, Darius does have a moderate intellectual disability. There are communication limitations. He does experience employment stress. He mentioned some co-occurring anxiety. He was starting to hint at this idea that he was feeling like he was a burden to both his aunt, his caregiver, and maybe some of the individuals that he was working with. And they were starting to notice some of that social withdrawal, that he wasn't doing things that he normally enjoyed doing. So those factors do increase pressure. And then when that stress accumulates, the risk can spike rapidly. So tying it all together with that diathesis stress interaction. So we're again, vulnerability meets stress. The predisposition was the neurodevelopmental differences, the emotional reactivity, the cognitive rigidity under stress, where the stress was going to be work instability, that isolation, doing loss of perceived competence, and because you kept mentioning no good. So I want you all to consider this, and when we're moving forward, and maybe it's something that I can come back to when we're looking at some of the questions, and I can make sure that we get through some of the things here. But I think I'll pose to you. This might be something that you reflect on personally, or maybe you do want to put into the chat. Based on these frameworks, what is a sentence or two that you may be able to use to describe Darius's risk, or maybe how you would have viewed it now that we're putting some maybe more clinical language to it? All right. I'll keep moving forward here. Absolutely. I'm seeing some high risk. He has high risk and we need to address. Absolutely. I'm seeing that we're all on the same page so far. So let's talk about some prevention strategies for sure. Okay, now that we have an overview of some ways to view suicidal thoughts and behaviors, um, now that we've identified risk, it is critical that we make attempts to prevent death by suicide. So let's explore some general, tangible strategies that you may be able to take into your own practice or day-to-day support. Thank you all for participating. I don't do a lot of like talking at individuals or lecturing. I do a lot more of our clinical-based courses at FAU. So this is a different experience for me. So I appreciate any interaction that I get along the way. It makes me feel more in my home and my teaching style. All right. So before we assess, before we plan, before we intervene, we connect. And that may be the counselor in me, maybe the therapist in me. But I'm also going to say it's supported by research because I know it's supported by research that connection is the first intervention. I'm thinking to myself right now, I teach our advanced theories course for our doc students. We know the biggest predictor of therapy is a therapeutic relationship. And similar with suicide prevention, being able to form a safe and trusting relationship with an individual is going to be one of the biggest interventions that you can do. So if you take almost nothing from this presentation today, knowing that your willingness to make a connection can help save a life. So when someone expresses suicidal thoughts or our instinct is often to fix, correct, or reassure. I can think back to my own family members and people that I've worked with previously that you hate to see people going through pain. You hate that psychological pain and you want to be able to alleviate that. So it might be easy to just say something like, don't say that, or you didn't mean that, or it's going to be okay. You'll figure it out. But trying to correct them may shut down their trust in you for future disclosures. Um, what keeps someone talking is your curiosity in them. Um, and one thing I forgot to mention too at the very beginning, and this is a kind of quick sidebar, is I've been trained in the Applied Suicide Intervention Skills Training Model, or ASSIST. I'm a trained facilitator for that approach. And one of the first things you learn in that training is how to look for invitations and make sure that you are being able to make that connection. So instead of rushing to fix the problem, we should slow down and ask, help me understand what has been stressing you out or some of these really tough feelings that you're experiencing. Curiosity communicates that you matter and your story matters. So clarity over complexity there in that middle one. For individuals with intellectual or developmental disabilities, clarity is essential. So avoid use, and this is something that I had to continuously remind myself, is that be careful with like metaphors or euphemisms. Like a lot of my counseling approach is grounded in the use of metaphors or trying to create real world examples of how this might look. But for someone with challenges to abstract reasoning or cognitive complexity, metaphors might shut them down. So we need to be able to use clear and direct communication. So kind of what we talked about earlier, Marquita, like, are you thinking about hurting yourself or are you thinking about killing yourself can be so critical in understanding the risks that you're working with. And direct language does not increase risk, it increases clarity. And I'll give you one more sidebar here. I saw it in the chat earlier during the first presentation, is dispelling the myth that by broaching suicide or mentioning suicide, we are actually putting the thought in their head. And I want to re-emphasize how big of a myth that is. And I remember during my early career, I used to work at Florida Hospital, which is one of the bigger hospitals in Orlando, and it's now Advent Health. And I did rounds with attending physicians and resident physicians as a behavioral health consultant for a lot of cases, a lot of individuals with intellectual disabilities. And I had asked a particular patient if they had thoughts of killing themselves. And the resident like chewed me a new one in the hallway. I'll never forget it. And after she got done chewing me out for putting the thought into her head, the attending looked at her and said, "You asked about diabetes. Did you put diabetes into her head because you asked that question?" And that just one example in itself, I think, was so powerful in how I shaped my viewpoint of some of the things that how like I want to make sure that that message gets across. But again, direct communication does not increase risk. Next, you'll see on the right-hand side that connection before crisis. If someone feels interrogated, they're going to shut down. That's one of the first things I teach my beginning counselors when we're in our skills courses and their practicum and field experiences is be careful with how many questions you ask. Be careful with your why questions. Be careful with how many times that you, because they're not on the hot seat. They're going through a crisis situation, and your goal is to demonstrate to them that they're safe and with someone who is safe. So before launching into assessment, establish eye contact at their level, a calm pacing, a respectful tone. People are going to be more honest when they feel valued. And individuals with IDD are no different. They want to feel valued. So making sure that you do express that to them in some capacity. Some practical communication strategies for prevention. I mentioned earlier in the last one, that connection, sit at eye level to the best that you can. This does communicate equality. Use calm in that slow pacing. Distress rises when others appear rushed. You can yourself be someone who can help someone co-regulate. If you're regulated and can remain calm, there is a lot of evidence to support that. And I've got anecdotal and research evidence to give you about how your presence can help be that safety net for that individual. Validate before problem solving. So something as simple as, I can see that this has been really heavy for you. That might be the first time that they've heard that before, and someone actually listening to them as opposed to trying to solve their problem for them. Validation does not equal agreement, though. It equals understanding. So because you are validating them does not mean you necessarily have the same values or the same principles, but it's letting them know that you understand what their values and principles look like. And last but not least, it's okay to allow for silence. Specifically with individuals with an intellectual developmental disability, that processing time can be a little bit more longer. But by that moment of silence, they are given that opportunity to help make maybe more of a sense of the crisis situation they're going with and to understand that you are a safe person. That's one of the biggest things that I do with some of our students in the College of Ed is I really do challenge them for that idea of silence. And I like to give students in my class specifically, like, I'm already a licensed therapist, so I'm comfortable with silence. And today we're going to learn together how you're going to be that as well. Absolutely, Amy, I see that in the chat. That it's a great example. Yeah, so I saw the body language that someone who might be with eye contact that might be uncomfortable for them, just matching their body language. Just showing that you've got an open body posture. If they're uncomfortable with eye contact, we're not going to force that onto them. We're going to sit there, we're going to be there with them, and we're going to kind of take their lead to what makes them appear to be most comfortable. We are going to talk at them, though. We don't want to lose any bit of the things that we're saying to them, but we're also not going to force them into things that they're going to be uncomfortable with. And then I got some examples on that right-hand side right there as well. For the sake of time, I won't go through all of them today, but again, you will have all of these slides, and I encourage you to read those and again, follow up if you have questions with me. I can't say that I have used the cans before, but I hope I'm going to take some notes out of the chat after we're done, and I'm going to follow up with that. Thank you. All right, so some formal assessment strategies and considerations. So now that we understand how risk develops and fluctuates, let's talk about how we can formally assess suicide risk. So this might be a little bit more for my friends that have a clinical background, but just for in general, here are some common suicide assessments that you might see in practice. The most common one that you're going to see um, is the Columbia Suicide Severity Scale. And before I get into these, I also want to say these formal tools do not replace clinical judgment, but they do maybe help some of the structure that you're going to be providing. So the Columbia Suicide Severity Scale, one of the most, if not the most widely used suicide risk tool in clinical and emergency settings. So it's going to measure severity of ideation, presence of the plan, intent, past behaviors, things that we've all talked about earlier that we know are significant risk factors and strong predictors of death by suicide. And why this is the most common one, or one of the most common ones that you'll see, the wording is direct. It distinguishes from passive, from active ideation. It asks about a plan and intent clearly, and it's widely recognized across systems. So again, if you're someone who works in the healthcare mental health spaces, this is one that we all can use to share language with. For individuals with IDD, there's very limited research with it. And for that paper that my team and I wrote, excuse me, that was one of the biggest things that people were recommending is additional work in this area, specifically with this assessment. So I'm hoping to be part of a team, and we're starting to get some cross-university collaboration going on maybe how we can look at making language more simplified. If you're administering this to someone with IDD, you might need to consider how you can maybe make the process time a little bit more extended. Visual supports may be helpful to clarify some of the intensities, maybe like a emoji chart scale is what I've previously used in the past. And abstract terms like intent may need some examples from you. So maybe having those readily available can help. So an example adaptation could be, instead of have you had thoughts, or have you had intent of killing yourself, you might rephrase that. Have you had a thought about hurting yourself so you would die? The next on the middle there, you see the Suicide Behaviorals Questionnaire Revised. And that one is a very brief 4-item screening tool, looks at the 4 questions being history of ideation or attempts, frequency of the thoughts, the communication of the intent, and then the perceived future risk. And the strength is, I'll call it duck a duck here. It's quick. It identifies past behaviors, which is one of the strongest predictors of future suicide, but it contains some pretty abstract phrasing, like how likely is it that you will attempt suicide someday? So just, even though it's one sentence, I'll repeat that one more time. How likely is it that you will attempt suicide someday? Can have pretty ranging thoughts, and like you have to like really consider like the different parts of that question. It does require hypothetical reasoning, a time projection, abstract possibility judgment, and those may be really difficult for someone with moderate or severe intellectual disability. So if you're going to use this one, clarify timeframes, avoid rushing, and consider checking comprehension by asking them to restate the question back to you. Just in general with scales and assessments, and again, I don't come to you with like all these beautiful array of like assessment batteries that you'd be able to use. And in fact, my point might be more of like, this is a future research endeavor that I hope to be more involved in the future. But we do know from previous research that adapting tools, strong recommendations to use plain language considerations, break down complex questions into smaller parts, read aloud the questions if needed. So I commonly do that with my folks with intellectual disabilities. I might read them with them, give them multiple ways of hearing the information, and preserve the construct at the end of the day. We don't change what is being measured, just how we are asking it. We simplify the wording. We do not simplify the meaning. And I just want to end this slide particularly, that no tool is originally designed specifically for individuals with intellectual disability. So assessment must be flexible, responsive, and individualized. I'm with you there, Lindsay. It is kind of strange. This is another framework on how we can look at warning signs that we were talking about earlier. This is a mnemonic, is path warm, that you can use to be able to quickly remember or give you a framework of remembering common warning signs that an individual is preparing to end their life. Whether it's in their their awareness or not. So I'm going to give you a quick overview of these different areas. We talked a little bit about some of these earlier, so I maybe not go into full detail about some of these yet, but is path warm is something that I highly, highly, highly recommend that if you work in a office space that you have a lot of individuals come in and out of that you might be assessing for risk for, or if you're someone that just has a lot of individuals with IDD or just in general coming through your office, I always have this somewhere visible to me. So for example, I'm in my home office right now, and on my bulletin board, on the top right-hand corner, I've got is path warm with these different recommendations with these different warning signs out listed. In my campus offices, I've got one in there that's visibly what I'd be able to see when talking with students. In the clinical spaces that I've worked in and continue to work in, I always make sure it's somewhere visible in my office. And I've got a note on my phone that has all the different is path warm because I'm going to be transparent. I use this pretty frequently, but sometimes I forget exactly where different letters go. And just a good refresher for even your most seasoned clinician, professional, or helping professional. Um, so going down through these, ideation. So this is going to include statements about warning to die or harm oneself. So this, I can use some of the Darius examples here. Brain bad, no good. I don't want to be here. Direct statements like take all pills. Um, and so again, for that instance, like David pretty clearly showed ideation. Or Darius, I should say. Purposelessness, statements here can be like, what's the point? Or nothing matters, or I can't do anything right. So for someone with a disability, this may show up as increased frustration with tasks, repeated statements of failure, loss of interest in some of their previous valued activities. Again, the anhedonia, depression-based symptom. Anxiety, this can be, there's the clinical anxiety, which is generalized anxiety disorder, social anxiety disorder, other classifications in the DSM-5 TR, but this can be symptoms of anxiety or just experience of anxiety in general that we all have. But think heightened agitation, pacing, or distress. So for instance, in Darius's case, that was increased agitation when discussing work, so his stressor, and difficulty using his communication when upset. T, we're going to talk about feeling trapped. So look for statements like, I can't get out, I'm stuck, there's no way out of this, I don't see an end to this. Those are common ones that I've heard in the past from folks with and without intellectual and developmental disabilities, but for specifically with folks with IDD, escalation when routines change, distress about job instability, and again, those repetitive negative statements. Hopelessness is a general feeling that things will not improve. And want to re-emphasize or emphasize the point here that hopelessness is one of the strongest predictors of suicide risk. So if you continuously hear the person that you love or supporting or working with mention that they just don't believe things will improve, your head might want to go a little bit to that hopelessness camp. Next, we've got withdrawal. That includes social isolation, spending more time alone, refusing those, again, anhedonia, those things that they might have enjoyed. So let's say, for instance, if you were Darius's aunt and you notice him withdrawing from music and basketball videos, that could be a pretty significant warning sign for you. With anger, this is going to be increased irritability or agitation. And I saw someone in the chat earlier mention that anger is a secondary emotion. And I wish I could have like screen grabbed that to broadcast on a PowerPoint slide to one of my counseling students because I've said that 100 times and I think they think I made that up. But by all means, that's a very common way of looking at anger is that it's a secondary emotion. Consider it like your iceberg, that anger is what we can see. The part of the iceberg underneath is what we don't. And that's usually what we know is to be masking another emotion that might be more uncomfortable for them. And Alexandria, I see your point right there. I think it's an important example to give. Like, what if you say someone's nothing will get better without arguing with them? Again, we're not arguing, we're validating. I'm hearing you think that all hope is lost. Something as simple as that, reflecting it back to them. And again, if you use a validation or reflection like that, you can say something like that so you're on the same page that you know that you're working maybe with hopelessness. And then we've got a couple more here. Recklessness. This is going to be engaging in risky or self-destructive behaviors. This may not always look like substance misuse. It may look like self-harm behaviors, medication misuse, impulsive, unsafe actions. Um, and then we've also got mood changes, which are sudden shifts in mood. So again, that's where it's really helpful to have a lot of collateral and more a collaborative team, because if we know that there's more individuals, or if we know that we can get like a lot of different perspectives on someone's maybe true baseline functioning or baseline behaviors, we'll be able to see those marked shifts in some of their moods. All right. So I will continue, but again, if you are someone who enjoyed the ISPath-WARM like model or a framework, there's really nice Google Images, like PDF versions of this that are fit really well into an office space.
Alex, Dr.
Yes.
Allen, there was a question that just came in the chat, and I'm real curious what the answer is as well, so
Okay.
I don't want to miss it. Someone just asked how many of those factors need to be present for you to consider someone at high risk. Does it matter how many, or is it one?
One. Now, granted, when I say one is enough for you to start looking at something more, like if you see one warning sign, maybe your head doesn't immediately go towards suicide. It should go to something, there's a difference in this individual, or that there's something that might be not in our foreseeable, like our vicinity of what we're looking at when we see this individual. But the more that you start to notice, the more that you should indicate a higher risk of suicide. So where you might see, for instance, I'll go back, like more anxiety. Or as a clinician, I'm not going to immediately think this individual is at a very heightened risk of suicide. But if I've noticed an increase in the anxiety that they're expressing, coupled with some mood changes, they're starting to get angry a lot more when we talk about things. They've expressed to me multiple times that just nothing is getting better for them. A lot of doom and gloom based statements. That's when I'm really going to like start to raise my eyebrow and consider some more intensive suicidal like prevention assessment based strategies. Thank you for that question. All right. The next one I'm going to talk about, this is a little bit more of like a clinical based assessment approach. However, I do want to say that anyone can ask these types of questions to get a better understanding of the risk that someone might have. So for this, like once someone expresses that ideation, our job shifts a little bit, and we're no longer identifying those warning signs. We're evaluating seriousness. And SLAP assessments are something that I very much use in my day-to-day interactions and practice, because it's something that I consistently reflect on when I'm talking to anyone who's expressed their thought. So why is a SLAP assessment useful? So in moments of crisis, cognitive overload happens. There's a lot going on in someone's life. So SLAP gives you the structure. It can help you determine, is this emergent? Do I need emergency services? Do I need immediate supervision? Do I need to remove means now? And the first part of this, that specificity on the left-hand side, specificity, think of this, how detailed is the plan? There is a big difference between I take all pills versus I take all my pills at 10 p.m. tonight when everyone is asleep. And if you heard that second one and your eyebrows raised and you get a little tightness in your chest, that's because it's a very specific plan and one that we need to immediately address. Lethality, I'm thinking to myself, how deadly is this method? Some methods are highly lethal. Some are less so, but overdose, especially with unknown dosage, can absolutely be fatal. So an important point here is individuals with IDD may not fully understand lethality. They may believe I'll just go to sleep and my problems won't be there when I wake up, but we don't want an accidental overdose due to that misunderstanding. Availability. So I'm thinking to myself when I ask questions around availability for the SLAP assessment, does this person have access to their means? This is critical. So maybe in the chat, so I can continue kind of going over everything. Can you think of anything available in Darius's cases? Like, what were some of the things that might be readily available for him that he has access to the means? So as we're typing in there, yep, there it is. He had medications, direct access to those medications. He took steps to securing it privately. So he knows he has the availability and the availability can't be taken away from him. That increases the risk significantly. And if means are accessible, your urgency should increase. And then proximity. Here I'm thinking, will someone be nearby to intervene? If someone plans to attempt suicide while alone, risk increases. If there are any supervised environments, risk may be mitigated, but not eliminated. We have to know someone has suicidal ideations, even if you've got cameras everywhere around the clock care. We still need to be able to take this seriously. All right. I appreciate you all interacting in the chat too. It helps me feel like I'm still in the classroom. All right. So let's rewind here. Before Darius disclosed a plan, before he hit his medication, before a SLAP assessment became relevant, what was already happening? We saw early behavioral indicators. These signs did not appear overnight. We saw a gradual withdrawal from preferred activities. He was sleeping more. There was crying episodes. Maybe we had head hitting with frustration, repeated negative self-statements. These were not random behaviors. They were communication. So I think a takeaway there is that behavior may communicate what language cannot. And I know a lot of the questions that I got prior to this is how can we assess an individual that may not have a wide vocabulary? And to Annie's right there to that point, all behavior is communication. So if we apply the is path warm mnemonic from earlier, we saw ideation, we saw purposelessness and that reported self-devaluation, we saw hopelessness, and like being tired of me. We saw withdrawal. He was isolating from social situations, a lot of mood changes, crying agitations. These signs were present before the plan was evident. And the reflection I want you to take away from here is that this is the heart of prevention. Suicide prevention often begins before direct statements about death. We do not just wait for, I want to die. We respond to something is changing in their behaviors and what they're saying to us. All right, I'm cognizant of the time, and I want to make sure that I can give the effort or the attention that we need to some of the intervention efforts. I'm not going to, again, I hope today that you leave with just one thing that you can take into your community or your practice or the loved ones that you have, or even within yourself. And these intervention efforts are going to be more general ideas. And when I'm thinking of someone, when I'm working with them, and I know there's thoughts of suicide, the plan that I'm helping them put into place to keep them safe for now. And that's going to be something that I probably really drill in to this workshop these last couple of minutes, is that concept of being safe for now. So with safety planning, once we determine risk is present, our goals shift. We are not solving someone's life. We are keeping them, again, safe for now. You're going to go to sleep tonight with my voice in your head saying safe for now. How many times I'm going to say it? When I safety plan with an individual, I'm reinforcing that the safety plan is not a contract. It is not a promise. It is not a, you won't do this, right? It is a collaborative plan between me and the individual to reduce immediate danger. So what is safety planning? It's brief, it's collaborative, it's concrete, and it's focused on the present moment. It is specifically designed to, or you should design it around, reducing immediate suicide risk, increasing coping or self-regulation behaviors, identifying who's to call, and reducing access to lethal means. And I'm really going to drive this home. So let's go for it now. All right, component one. So it begins with awareness. And when we talked about awareness for the last about an hour and a half through the two different presentations you've seen today, and if we can identify those early warning signs, we can intervene before the crisis escalates. So warning signs are personal. They are patterns and they are shifts. So what might be a warning sign for some may be common behaviors for others and vice versa. We've talked about warning signs pretty in-depthly today, so I might skip over this in case anything else comes to my mind. But some things that you can use here for warning signs, again, is Pathform provides a really good overview. Some of the things that we talked about in the AFSP presentation, some of the prevention things I mentioned earlier, risk factors to look for in that stress diathesis model. Just generally looking to see that. But when we're thinking about intervention, we want to increase the awareness of warning signs from that individual's perspective. We want them to be able to identify their own warning signs that they might be starting to experience some more suicidal ideation. We want their caregivers, their support team, their helping professionals, their educators, their friends, their peers to also know some of those warning signs too, because some things might happen out of your awareness. And the more people we can educate on some of your own warning signs, the better we're able to intervene early. Once we recognize warning signs, the next step is what can the person do on their own in the moment to reduce the distress? So these are going to be internal coping strategies. These are the skills the individuals can independently use before reaching out to others. The goal is not to solve every problem. The goal is to lower emotional intensity, interpret escalation, and create a space between feeling and action. In suicide prevention, even a small reduction in stress can be very protective. So there's a variety of strategies that you can see on your screen here. Mindfulness and deep breathing exercises are growing a lot in research base for individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities. Anecdotally speaking, and from research, I know individuals with disabilities love having music that they can readily be available to them. With the increase in uptake in smartphones now, we usually have some music pretty readily available. Comfort shows at the bottom right-hand side there usually seems to be one that's pretty useful as well. They're predictable. You know what's going to come, and specific episodes can really enhance your emotions and make you feel better. Journaling or drawing as well, artistic creative expressions can be really powerful. Movement behavioral activation is one of my personal favorite ones. Finding ways to help that person be able to distract themselves by getting their body up and moving, and however that looks. And considering, again, that movement looks different for individuals with disabilities potentially. So finding and catering a strategy that most fits that individual. But ultimately, we want to practice these coping and safety strategies before a crisis occurs. And I think it's really critical for us as helping professionals, as caregivers, as maybe individuals with a disability, that we need to have this plan in place before the serious thoughts start to occur. So being proactive as possible. So again, when I'm working with individuals in a one-on-one scenario or in a group scenario, we're going to practice these. We're going to see how they felt in the moment when they experienced them. What were their emotions beforehand? What were their emotions afterwards? Because I want to raise that awareness for them that these do work. I mean, ultimately,
excuse me for interrupting. We have only about 5 minutes left. We still have about 315 persons in the classroom with us, and we really do want to also get their feedback. So I'm wondering, are you nearing to bring it to a close for now? Because I want to get as many of them to respond to this session feedback, because I think we want a part two.
absolutely. What I can do is I can kind of summarize, I can talk a little bit about emergency services because that might be on some people's minds.
Okay.
I'm trying
Do
to
you
think.
mind if do you mind if we in about 3-4 minutes we want to put the poll up?
Absolutely. That's perfectly fine with me.
Okay, cool.
But one thing with the coping strategies before I kind of move on here, and I'm trying to figure out what I think would be most beneficial, is that they need to be coming from the individual themselves. You can't just like give them like a prescription of like, here's your 5 coping strategies, enjoy. It has to be something that they've identified that they know is going to work. For this slide in particular, people who can provide support, so we're thinking about safety planning. I want them to identify some trusted individuals in their lives. ideally from multiple aspects of their lives. So from family or caregiver aspects, from vocational rehab support there, vocational rehab, I should say. If they've got mental health professionals that are part of their team, or just anyone that has daily or consistent interactions in helping them know who are safe people that they can talk about this with, that are going to understand them and validate them. Professionals or agencies as well. You'll have my slides to get some resource lists here. Again, collaborating with individual and helping them practice this as well. So if they are going to use 988, there are services that 988 does offer for you to practice how to use them, and what that would look like. And similarly with like emergency departments or other stabilization units, if you're helping professional or someone with background, being able to walk through what that looks like for them can be really important. I do want to emphasize this real fast. Environmental safety, which is reducing access to lethal means, is one, if not the most evidence-based supported suicide prevention strategy. When emotional intensity rises, access matters. And I should say the lack of access matters. So this includes lock or removal of medications, securing firearms, or lock safes, removing sharp objects, monitoring to high-risk locations. If you know that the individual has like a thought in their head that they might use something that could end their life pretty rapidly, get rid of that means, or make sure it's not readily accessible to them to where they know that they could use it as part of their suicidal plan. So things like asking, like, do you know where you can get the pills from? And then collaborating with caregivers or people in that person's life to remove them, similar firearms or other things similar to that. I do also want to just quickly emphasize this point real fast, is that emergency services should be used when the opportunity to keep the person safe for now is gone. If there is an imminent danger that you know that the individual will end their life if you are not around, or if they are left to their own devices, that's when emergency services need to be incorporated. And the one message I will say here, and again, you'll have slides to see how you can ask these types of questions and be able to process this more, is that if someone needs to use emergency services, please make sure you follow up with them. Whether that's when they're discharged and back in the community, whether that's an opportunity to visit them when they're at the facility or the emergency department, just re-emphasizing that you care. I have resources and things in here. The one thing I want to say before we part ways today, I want to make sure that I leave this here, so you have my contact information one more time, and again, you'll have these slides, is that if this was something that's interesting to you and you want to potentially contribute to the evidence base, I'm part of a research team that we are really doing a lot of work in this area. When I say I ended this workshop today and I'm completing it, like some research in this particular topic area, I'm not joking you or not blowing smoke. This is a short 1 to 2 minute form for individuals that might be helping professionals working with individuals with IDD, individuals that are caregivers or support system or family, or if you're someone that has an IDD and have mental health experiences that you'd like to share. We are actively trying to make some evidence-based recommendations for providers and healthcare providers and caregivers and those with intellectual disabilities. So if you're willing to share your experiences and would like to potentially contribute, oh no, I don't know how to fix that. I can follow it up when I provide the slides as well. Or you could reach out to me expressing interest, whatever that looks like for you. And I truly just want one more time, thank you all for coming today. And I hope
And I
this helped.
see your contact information is there and your email, so they can
Yes.
also email you once we provide. Let me, it's 1:54 and I want to provide an opportunity for Ms. Marquita and Dr. Alex to remain with us for a few minutes. And if there is just one or two questions that somebody absolutely would love for them to answer before we log off, we can stay about 5 minutes over. We try to finish exactly at 2 o'clock, but I saw several questions and you have access to them. But is there something that we really need to get out there real quickly? Ms. Marquita, any closing comments that you would like to make? We probably should unmute her and Dr. Alex as well.
I just thank you all again for the opportunity to be here today. I really enjoyed this myself. And I would just say, look for additional resources from us at afsp.org. And if you want to be more specific about resources in Virginia, you can go afsp.org/Virginia.
Dr. Alex?
Yeah, similarly, I really, really appreciate from the bottom of my heart you all taking the time to listen to us today and engage with us. This is such a personally meaningful topic for myself. And Marquita mentioned that as well. And I hope you leave with at least one thing today. And if you haven't left with one thing and want to gain one thing, you've got my contact information, and I'm happy to help continue this conversation and hope to be able to help produce more research and scholarship that will inform this discussion.
I want to say to both of you on behalf of Virginia Board for People with Disabilities that this has been an outstanding presentation. And it is a tough subject, and I am so proud that our agency took the plunge and decided that it was time for us to address this publicly throughout the Commonwealth of Virginia. We know that 2 hours is very, very short to discuss such a complex topic, but both of you have done a great job. I think you were a great team, not having met each other, worked together before, but Marquita, your introduction to all of it and representing the foundation here in the state of Virginia was fabulous. And Dr. Alex, your research, your comprehension, talking to even the licensed professionals and persons who work in the field and recognizing that many of them were in the classroom as well. I saw all of the chat responses. I saw questions. I saw some examples that many of the participants were giving. We are just grateful to both of you for your expertise and for spending this time with us. To all of our participants, there were over 700 persons who registered for this session. That says to us that this topic is critically important and there's mass interest about it and for it. We believe that many will access our Virginia Board for People with Disabilities Facebook page and or our YouTube page. We will certainly share from our Director of Planning, Research, and Evaluation, Nia Harrison, who has been on with us quietly, but I see her in the classroom. She will provide for us the evaluation results and let us know what the participants have said, but I think we saw it in all of their expressions as the chats were coming through and as all of the applause and claps and all of that good stuff. We did ask a question in regards to any of you who would be interested in having a part two, and we will discuss how that part two will be provided, and certainly work with the presenters to make sure that their schedules may permit. But there may be a level two that we can provide more time, and not necessarily in this 2-hour window of time, but maybe we can come up with maybe a Saturday and maybe a 4-hour experience or something like that, that would give you more time to interact and ask the questions that you have. But I took copious notes, and I have like 3 pages of notes because this is so helpful. And knowing what to look for, some of the strategies, some of the factors, I have experienced a lot of that with others. And I have certainly experienced hearing from parents about some of our alumni who have experienced some of this. So this has really been a blessing to me, and I think to all of us. So we want to thank you so very, very much. To all of you who registered and who participated today, we appreciate you. And we hope that we will continue to provide the kinds of sessions that are going to be educational and informative, but also give us something to work with as we continue to provide the kind of support for people with disabilities throughout the Commonwealth of Virginia. So thank you very much, all of you, for coming. If our alumni could turn on their cameras, in addition to all of the other participants, we want to get a good picture for our newsletter. But thank you, thank you, thank you. Dr. Alex and Ms. Marquita, can you please just stay with us for just a few minutes as we go out for a debrief? Let's say thank you again, and it is 2:00 on the dot. So thank you. Our next session will be March the 20th. We're not releasing what that topic will be at the moment, but it is Developmental Disabilities Month in the month of March. We may do part 2 of this. We don't know yet. And then our final session for this state year will be April the 17th. So you will get our marketing materials. I want to thank the whole team for helping to make this a success. And we're out. Thank you. Thank you, Christine, for putting that slide up.
Absolutely, Dr. Penny.
I see some of them are staying on. I don't know if somebody has a question while we're just waiting for everybody to log off. We're just going to keep our team and the presenters just for a few minutes after.
We did have one question, Dr. Penny, and it was more about how you have the conversation with an individual who has a developmental disability when someone within their circle has died by suicide.
Dr. Alex, Ms. Marquita, any responses to that? That's a loaded question. We have to unmute them. It's like,
Yeah, sorry, I was just chatting. I think it's being, definitely would need to hear from Marquita as well, but from my perspective, it's needing to be direct. Because I think if you're not having the direct conversation, you're continuously perpetuating that suicide is a taboo topic or something that we don't talk about. And by normalizing the conversation and being transparent, you're showing that yourself as someone that is comfortable talking about that if that person was ever to have those thoughts themselves.
Mhm. And I would agree. And then I'd also probably add letting them kind of lead the conversation.
Mhm.
And that's the grief educator in me saying, you know, what is it that you need to get out and what can I respond to in that sense?
Thank you.
when someone uses the term lived experiences, is that to be understood that that individual is saying that somewhere either in their life they have had someone, and I love what you said at the beginning, Marquita, not to use committed suicide. It's in my notes. I'm trying to remember.
Mhm.
Died by suicide
Mhm.
is an acceptable term, I think you said. Is that person saying that and or that they themselves perhaps?
Mhm. More commonly, I hear people use it when they have either made an attempt or really struggled with thoughts. I have heard people refer to themselves as having lived experience when they've had a loss close to them. But generally, when they say they have lived experience, it's their personal experience.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. Okay. All right, are we able to say goodbye? I see I saw several of our alumni. So hello, Marlo Dean. I see you still in the room. And of course, I saw Darlene and I saw Kishiera, all of our alumni who were here today. We are grateful. Can we release all of those who are still in the room that are not a part of the team?
Yes, ma'am.
I see Miss Carla Francis Jones is still with us, and PT Horns or Thorns, Thornis is still with us. They may want to be unmuted, I'm not sure. Just want to take the temperature in terms of our team and expressing our gratitude to our presenters. What were your thoughts? What did you think about the session? Christine, Kelly? I want to hear from our interpreters because I know it was a lot of
I think we're still on live.
Streaming.
Oh, we're still live streaming? Okay. To our Facebook
Yes,
viewers.
I'm on Facebook. We're still live.
Thank you,
Christine?
Facebook viewers.
Christine, could you please make me host again and I can end the live stream?
Thank you, Facebook viewers. On behalf of Virginia Board for People with Disabilities and our Training and Alumni Development Programs Unit, we're so happy that you have accessed our Facebook feed and our YouTube. Are we out, Anita?
Yes, we're off.
Okay.
I apologize for that. I had something happened that has never happened before, which is that I had to, sorry to say this, I left to go to the restroom very quickly, came back, and my computer was locked. And when I unlocked it, I was kicked out of the Zoom. But thankfully, the Facebook live stream continued. So I emailed Christine and I was like, we're still on Facebook. I just don't even want to come back into the Zoom because I'm scared we'll like suddenly end it.
Somebody sent me a text and said, I think it was BBC. Eli said, I think we lost Anita, but the Facebook is still running. So we were like, that's
exactly. Yes. I was like, I was waiting for like the delay to end. And then I was like, we're still on, so no problems.
Okay. I just want to give our team and have you guys introduce yourselves also to our presenters real quickly. Starting with Christine and then Kelly and then Anita.
Hello. Good afternoon. Thank you both for joining us. I'm Christine Germar. I'm the Training and Alumni Development Programs Coordinator here for Virginia Board for People with Disabilities, and I have the wonderful privilege of working alongside Dr. Penny Sweetenberg-League and Miss Kelly Vanella, as well as Anita Ayers.
What'd you think of the session, Christine?
I thought it was great. It was filled with so much helpful content. And I think the frank discussions about the topic are immensely beneficial for everyone. And I think that I suspect that the polls are going to say folks want to see more.
Yeah.
So thank you very much for bringing this to us and for everyone.
Kelly.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Kelly Vanella. I'm a training programs coordinator. I was just blown away with the presentations. I was so excited leading up to this. I was not disappointed at all. Thank you so much. This was great and much needed.
Thank you and nice to meet you.
Anita.
Hi, I'm Anita Ayers, the Communications and Information Manager. So I assist with the Facebook live stream component of these training sessions. And I just want to echo everybody else. This was such a really great presentation and so helpful for everybody, I think.
Thank you. Nice to meet you.
And our interpreters who worked so very hard. How were things? Everything went well?
Smooth as usual.
Okay. Did we, out of curiosity, did we have many folks who logged in, additional people? No?
Up to 7, but then around 1, it was down to like 3, I think. I think people
Yeah,
come
you
on
talking about
like during
Facebook. I'm
lunch.
talking about accessing the interpreters.
Oh, I apologize.
Yeah, that's okay, Anita.
I think there were at least 2 or 3 individuals who were relying that had logged on,
Okay.
needing those services. And to answer the feedback question about if there's an interest in this, 195 of 225 said yes.
Already you can tell.
I can see the yes.
Wow. Well, Dr. Alex and Miss Marquita, you are part of the Virginia Board family now, and we just thank you so very much for your expertise and for working with us. We are going to, I'm going to send you a template of an invoice, and I'm going to ask you to send your invoices to me on Monday morning or Monday, and so that we can process the blessing that we want to be to you. And BBC, I forgot Eli. Eli, was there anything? What you think? Everything went smoothly, I saw.
Oh yeah, there's no problems at all. Just glad that we caught that we were still on Facebook.
Yeah. And I'll
I was like,
caption
I had it open on my phone. I was just checking, and I was like, wait a second, I think we're still live. Hold on.
Awesome. I want to say
But otherwise, it's great.
Thank you, Eli. And thank you, Joe, Gail, our captioner. Thank you so very much for being with us today. We appreciate your service as well. I want to say to the presenters as we say goodbye, that I may have said it at the beginning, but this was literally the highest registered session that we have delivered. In 2020, when the George Floyd tragedy was occurring, our alumni said to us, we need to do something about this. We are struggling. This is affecting us. We need to talk about this. And so we started doing mental health, self-care kinds of experiences, in addition to other kinds of workshops over the last 6 years. This one has never been, and in my 11 years with the agency this coming March, I have never seen anyone talk about this subject matter. And yet, because we had alumni whose families were experiencing it and actually dying by suicide, I'm learning that language, Marquita. It was important for us as a team, because we work with our alumni, to say, you know what, let's be bold enough to step out and do this. And I am so grateful that we successfully found and vetted and found the two of you. I thought you did a fabulous job, and we are grateful. So we will continue to stay in touch. And if there's anything that Virginia Board can do, if we can help promote to our alumni. I heard your appeal, Dr. Alex, at the end, and I'm sure that there's some alumni who might want to contribute. We have access to 650 of our alumni that we talk to every week. So if there is a marketing piece, a flyer, or anything that gives them the information to be in contact with you or the group or whatever, we'd love to do that. And Ms. Marquita, if there's anything that we can do, I know you are volunteer driven. And I think that you said that are you in Northern Virginia? Can't remember.
I'm actually in Harrisonburg.
In Harrisonburg.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So not far from you, right, Christine?
That's right. She's just right down the road.
Yeah.
Right down the road.
If there's anything that we can do to provide information or market or promote anything for you up in that area, we have our Northern Virginia region of all of our alumni. So we'd be happy to do that.
Well,
Having said that, it's 2:13. You guys have a wonderful weekend. And again, thank you.
Thank you all.
Appreciate you.
Absolutely.
inviting me to
Thanks very
offer.
much. Have a
This
good
is
weekend
fantastic as well.
Thank you, Dr.